Captain Morgan had been a pilot for nearly 15 years, and she loved her job more than anything. There was something about the feeling of soaring through the clouds, looking down at the world from above, that made her feel free. As she arrived at the airport for her scheduled flight, she smiled as she greeted the security officers, fellow pilots, and flight attendants. She was ready for another day at work. She had worked hard to get to where she was. From the very beginning of her career, when she was one of the few women, and certainly the only black woman, in a male-dominated field, she had to prove herself. Every step of the way, she faced challenges. But she pushed through. She worked tirelessly, stayed focused, and made sure that she was always prepared. She knew her skills were top-notch, and she had the respect of many of her colleagues. She had earned it. As Captain Morgan walked through the airport terminal, she felt a sense of pride. She had earned her place in the cockpit, and she was proud to represent not only herself but her community. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and she wasn't about to let anything ruin it. However, as she walked toward the staff check-in area, something felt off. The usual cheerful faces of the airline staff weren't there. There was a noticeable tension in the air. She brushed it off at first, thinking it was just her imagination. But as she approached the desk, the person behind the counter gave her a strange look. "Excuse me, Captain Morgan," the airline staff member said, his voice stiff. "We need you to wait outside for a moment." Captain Morgan was taken aback. Wait outside? That wasn't how things usually went. She had flown countless times with this airline, and she had always been treated professionally. But today, something was different. Something didn't feel right. She stood there for a moment, confused. She had checked in early, like always. She had everything prepared and was ready for her flight. But now they were telling her to wait outside? It didn't make sense. "Why outside?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though she could feel the frustration building inside her. The staff member glanced nervously around before replying, "Just a few minutes. It's standard procedure. We'll call you when we're ready." Captain Morgan stood still for a moment, trying to understand. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was there some sort of misunderstanding? Did they forget to prepare something for her? She had never been treated like this before. It was unusual, and it made her uncomfortable. She glanced around the terminal, trying to find something familiar in the sea of people rushing by. But everything felt strange. "Okay, I'll wait outside," she said, her voice controlled but laced with a growing sense of unease. She turned and walked towards the door, doing her best to maintain her composure. But deep down, a voice in her head kept asking, "Why am I being treated like this?" The door closed behind her with a soft click, and she stepped into the cold air of the airport's outdoor space. The sharp breeze hit her face, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her body, trying to shake off the chill. But it wasn't the cold that made her uneasy. It was the feeling that something wasn't right. She walked back and forth outside the building, glancing at her watch every few seconds. 10 minutes had passed, and no one had come to tell her what was going on. What's the delay, she thought. She had flown dozens of times from this airport, and never once had she been asked to wait outside. There had to be a mistake. But what if there wasn't? A few people passed her on the sidewalk, but no one seemed to take any notice of her. She began to feel the weight of the moment pressing on her. The feeling of being singled out for something she couldn't quite understand gnawed at her. Was she being punished for something? She had always shown up on time, done her job well, and treated everyone with respect. So why was she being treated differently today? A sense of unease settled over her. She had been in similar situations before, where she was the only black woman in the room, and the subtle looks or whispers were hard to ignore. She had learned to brush it off, to focus on the work at hand. But today, it felt different. This wasn't just an isolated look. This was being asked to wait outside without explanation. It felt personal. As she stood there in the cold, she felt a deep frustration rising in her chest. She was tired of dealing with things like this, tired of proving herself over and over. She had worked so hard to get where she was, and yet she still had to fight against people's biases and assumptions. It wasn't fair, but it was the reality she had learned to live with. She thought about all the times she had been the only woman or the only black person in a room. There were times when she had felt like she needed to work twice as hard to be recognized. She had pushed through the doubt, the silence, and the looks. But today felt different. It felt like something deeper was at play. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again and a staff member stepped out. He looked at Captain Morgan and motioned for her to come back inside. "Captain Morgan," he said in a tone that was still uncomfortable but slightly more apologetic. "We're ready for you now." She nodded, trying to mask the frustration that was building inside. She followed him back into the terminal, her mind racing with questions. As she walked through the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had been singled out, and she couldn't figure out why. But she was determined to find out. Her flight had been delayed, but Captain Morgan wasn't going to let this experience pass without understanding what had happened. She wasn't the kind of person to let things slide, not after everything she had fought for in her career. As she made her way back to the check-in area, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the start of something bigger. Maybe it was time to confront the unspoken biases that had followed her all these years. It was time to stop letting people treat her like she didn't belong. But that would have to wait. For now, she had a job to do. The flight wasn't going to fly itself, and Captain Morgan was determined to do what she did best: fly. This expansion keeps the tension and builds on Captain Morgan's experience, setting the stage for her next actions. "Would you like me to continue or adjust anything?" Captain Morgan stepped back into the airport terminal, feeling a mix of confusion and frustration. Her mind kept racing, questioning why she had been asked to wait outside. As she walked through the door, the chill from the outside air still lingered, making her feel uneasy. She tried to push the strange feelings away and focus on the task ahead, but something in her gut told her that this situation wasn't just about a simple misunderstanding. The staff member who had motioned for her to come inside didn't say much as they walked back to the check-in desk. He looked as uncomfortable as she felt. She could tell he didn't want to be the one to explain what had just happened. But Captain Morgan wasn't about to let it go without understanding the reason behind it. She had been working in the airline industry for so long that she had developed a keen sense for when something wasn't right. This wasn't the usual mix-up or delay. There was more to it than that. When they reached the desk, Captain Morgan stood still for a moment, collecting her thoughts. She wanted to stay calm, to handle the situation with professionalism, but it was hard not to feel betrayed. She had always prided herself on her dedication and the way she carried herself, and yet today, she had been made to feel like an outsider. Something about this just didn't sit right with her. "I need to understand why I was asked to wait outside," Captain Morgan said, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't the normal procedure." The staff member hesitated before responding, shifting his gaze slightly. "I'm not sure what the situation was, Captain, but everything is sorted now. You can proceed with the flight." Captain Morgan looked at him, searching his face for any hint of what was really going on. She didn't buy the response. Something deeper was at play here. She had flown countless times for this airline, and never once had she been treated in such a manner. She had a feeling that the issue wasn't about procedure or scheduling. It was about something else. "I'd appreciate a more detailed explanation," Captain Morgan pressed. "I have a right to know why I was kept outside." The staff member looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I don't know what happened," he repeated, though his tone lacked the confidence of someone who truly believed that. "It's all taken care of now. Just forget about it." But Captain Morgan couldn't forget about it. She wasn't the type of person to let things slide when they didn't feel right. She had fought her entire career to get where she was, to be respected as a capable, skilled pilot. She wasn't going to let anyone, especially not in her own industry, make her feel less than she was. As she stood at the desk, she took a deep breath. "I can't forget about it," she said calmly. "Not until I understand what happened. I've been treated this way before, and I don't plan on accepting it anymore." The staff member seemed taken aback by her calm but firm response. He looked around nervously, as if hoping someone else would come to address the situation. But Captain Morgan wasn't about to let anyone else handle this for her. She was determined to get answers. She could feel the eyes of other people in the terminal on her. They were watching, probably wondering what was going on. She couldn't help but notice that no one else was being treated the way she was. Other pilots, crew members, and even passengers walked by without a second thought. Why was she being singled out? It wasn't just about the incident at the desk anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior that Captain Morgan had faced for years. She had worked in the airline industry long enough to know that being a woman, and a black woman at that, often meant being treated differently. It wasn't always obvious, but it was there under the surface. She had learned to ignore the whispers, the looks, the little comments, but today, it was too much. This wasn't a small incident that could be brushed aside. "I deserve an explanation," Captain Morgan said, her voice now firmer. "If I'm going to continue working for this airline, I need to know that I'm being treated with respect, just like anyone else." She could feel her frustration building, but she kept it in check. She knew that if she lost her cool, it would be easier for them to dismiss her. She couldn't let that happen. She needed answers, and she wasn't going to back down. The staff member shifted uncomfortably again, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "Please, Captain, just give it a little time. Everything is fine now. You're free to go to your plane." But that wasn't good enough for Captain Morgan. She knew that she couldn't just let this go. Something wasn't right, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. "I'm not going to just move on from this," Captain Morgan replied. "If this airline has an issue with me, I need to know about it." For a moment, the staff member didn't say anything. Then in a low voice, he muttered, "It's not you, Captain, it's complicated." Captain Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Complicated how?" The staff member shook his head, his face flushing. "I can't explain it, Captain. You just need to go to your flight." Captain Morgan didn't buy it. She stood there for a long moment, staring him down. The tension in the air was thick, but she didn't look away. Finally, she turned and walked away from the desk. She wasn't going to get answers from this person. It was clear now that the staff member wasn't going to be the one to give her the explanation she was seeking. She was going to have to figure it out herself. As she walked through the terminal toward the gate, Captain Morgan's mind was spinning. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that this was more than just a misunderstanding or a mix-up. She had been treated differently. She had been made to wait outside for no reason that she could understand. And it hurt. She had worked so hard to get to where she was. It wasn't easy being a woman, especially a black woman in a field where she was often the only one. But she had proved herself, time and time again. She had earned the respect of her colleagues, the trust of her passengers, and the love of her family. But today, she had been made to feel like she didn't belong. It wasn't just about this one incident. It was about the years of small slights, the hidden prejudices, the whispers behind her back. It was about the fact that no matter how hard she worked, she would always have to prove herself in ways that others didn't. But Captain Morgan wasn't going to let that stop her. She wasn't going to let them win. She was a fighter. And this fight was far from over. This second part deepens Captain Morgan's internal struggle and sets the stage for the actions she will take next. Would you like to continue with the next part, or make adjustments? Captain Morgan walked down the airport corridor with determination in every step. The air felt thick around her, and she could hear her heels echoing in the otherwise quiet terminal. Her mind was racing, but her face remained calm and composed, just as it always had when she was in the cockpit. She was used to the stress of flying, to handling complicated situations without losing her cool. But today was different. Today she wasn't dealing with the usual pressure of flight plans, passengers, or weather. She was dealing with something more personal, something that threatened the very core of her dignity. As she approached the gate, the crew was already there preparing for the flight. She could see them all gathered, chatting and getting ready for the long hours ahead. They looked up when she walked in, but their expressions were neutral. No one said anything at first, and Captain Morgan knew. They had noticed what had happened. They had seen her standing outside, waiting while the others were allowed to go on with their work. They knew something was off, but none of them had the courage to ask her about it. It was easier to pretend it hadn't happened, easier to act like nothing was wrong. But Captain Morgan wasn't about to let that happen. She walked straight to the crew leader, a man named David who had been with the airline for years. He was tall, with a commanding presence, and he usually commanded respect in any room he entered. But Captain Morgan wasn't intimidated by him. She had earned her place just like everyone else, and if anyone was going to give her the respect she deserved, it would be him. "David," she said, her voice steady. "We need to talk." David raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her directness. He looked around nervously as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "Sure, Captain," he replied, trying to maintain his usual air of authority. "What's going on?" Captain Morgan crossed her arms and took a step closer, to him. "I want to know why I was treated like that earlier. Why was I asked to wait outside?" David hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. He glanced at the rest of the crew, who were all pretending to be busy but watching the conversation closely. Captain Morgan didn't care about that. She needed answers. "I don't know," David finally said, "but I think it's best if we just forget about it. Things like this happen sometimes, you know how it is." Captain Morgan shook her head. "No, David, I don't know how it is. I've never been asked to wait outside before, and I've never been made to feel like I don't belong here. Not by the airline I've worked for, and certainly not by the people I work with." David shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Captain, I didn't mean for it to happen like this. It's not personal. You know I respect you." "I don't care about respect, David," she said, her voice growing a little firmer. "I care about being treated fairly. I've been in this business long enough to know when something isn't right. I've been on the receiving end of this kind of treatment before, but today felt different. It felt personal." David looked down, his face flushing with guilt. He was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but Captain Morgan wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. She had worked too hard for too long to let this moment slip by without standing up for herself. "I want to know what's going on," she continued, her voice steady and calm. "I deserve an explanation." The other crew members had gathered around now, listening to the conversation in silence. Some of them looked nervous, while others seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Captain Morgan could feel the tension in the air, but she wasn't about to back down. David let out a sigh and glanced around the room before lowering his voice. "I don't think you're going to like this, Captain." "Try me," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "Okay," David said, taking a deep breath. "I've been hearing some things. Some of the higher-ups, they've been making decisions about certain pilots and, well, I think they might have thought you wouldn't go along with something. Maybe that's why they asked you to wait outside. Maybe they were testing you." Captain Morgan's heart sank. "Testing me?" she repeated, her voice soft but filled with disbelief. "Why would they test me?" David looked away, not meeting her eyes. "I don't know, Captain. It's hard to say. But I think it's about more than just the flight today. There have been some whispers. You know how things can be behind closed doors." Captain Morgan felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had always known that she was different in this industry. She had faced obstacles that others didn't have to face. But to hear it so plainly, to hear that her own airline might be questioning her abilities, felt like a punch in the gut. "Whispers about what?" she asked quietly, her voice now tinged with frustration. David shook his head. "I don't know all the details, but I do know that there's been talk about diversity, about quotas, about what pilots they want to push forward. And I'm sorry, Captain, but I think you got caught in the middle of it." Captain Morgan's fists clenched at her sides. "Are you telling me that the reason I was treated like that today is because of my race? Because I'm a black woman?" David looked pained. "I don't know for sure, Captain, but I've heard things. Things that, well, they shouldn't be said out loud, but they get said anyway." The truth hit her like a wave. She had suspected it, but to hear it confirmed in such a blunt way was crushing. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. This was part of something bigger, something deeply ingrained in the system. Captain Morgan felt the anger rise inside her, but she refused to let it control her. She took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. "Thank you, David," she said. her voice now low and controlled. "But I need to handle this myself. I can't let this go. Not anymore." David nodded, looking relieved that the conversation was over, but Captain Morgan wasn't done. She walked away from him, determined to make sure that no one else would ever be treated the way she had been. She wasn't going to let this silent discrimination slide. Not when it was so clear that it had been happening for far too long. Captain Morgan knew that the fight ahead of her wouldn't be easy. She would face resistance, doubt, and more than a few people who didn't believe in the changes she was about to demand. But she had come too far to let this system keep her down. It was time to stand up. Time to make her voice heard. She walked to the nearest gate agent, requesting to speak with someone in charge. She needed answers. She wasn't going to let this moment pass without making sure that everyone knew what had happened, and most importantly, she was going to make sure it never happened again. This part develops Captain Morgan's determination to confront the issue head-on and sets the stage for her next steps. Would you like to proceed with the next part, or adjust anything? Captain Morgan walked with a sense of purpose, her steps echoing in the quiet hallway as she made her way to the airline's head office. Her thoughts were swirling, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She had been treated unfairly, and it was time to take a stand. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for everyone who had been silently oppressed in ways that were too often overlooked. As she approached the door to the office, she paused for a moment. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. Inside, a few senior airline staff were gathered around a large conference table. Their conversation stopped as soon as they saw her. There was a shift in the room, a brief moment of tension. Captain Morgan had earned her reputation in the skies, but here, in this room, she had to earn her respect all over again. "Captain Morgan, what can we do for you?" asked Mr. Turner, the senior vice president of operations. He was tall, with a sharp suit and a demeanor that suggested he wasn't used to being challenged. His tone was polite, but there was an underlying sense of discomfort, a reluctance to face what he knew was coming. "I'm here because I need answers," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "I've been with this airline for over a decade, and today I was treated like I didn't belong here. I was told to wait outside for no reason, and when I asked why, I got no clear answer. I've had enough of this." Mr. Turner shifted in, his chair exchanging looks with the others around the table. He didn't speak immediately, perhaps weighing his words carefully. Captain Morgan didn't give him the chance to deflect. "You need to understand something, Mr. Turner," she continued, her voice steady. "I've been on the receiving end of microaggressions before. Small things like being overlooked for assignments or being treated like I'm not as capable as the others. I've learned to push through it. But today, this was different. I was singled out and it felt personal." The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. The other staff members looked down at their papers, avoiding eye contact. Captain Morgan could feel their discomfort, but she wasn't there to make them comfortable. She was there to make them listen. "Captain Morgan, I assure you, this was not personal," Mr. Turner said finally. His voice lacked the usual assurance. "I understand that you're upset, but I need to explain. There's been some internal restructuring going on, and unfortunately things got miscommunicated. We've been making decisions about scheduling, about who's flying, what routes, and in the process, some mistakes were made. You were caught in the middle of that." Captain Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Mistakes? I was told to wait outside as if I were a nobody." "That's not a mistake, Mr. Turner. That's something deeper, and you know it. You've seen how it works in this industry." There was a moment of silence as the weight of her words hung in the air. Mr. Turner sighed, clearly realizing that his usual tactics of avoiding direct answers wouldn't work with her. "You're right," he admitted, looking up. "There has been talk within the higher ranks of the airline. Some have raised concerns about diversity initiatives, and yes, you've been impacted by it." Captain Morgan's heart raced. She had suspected this was the case, but hearing it out loud felt like a blow to the chest. For all her hard work, all her sacrifices, she was being judged by something that had nothing to do with her qualifications. She had always prided herself on being the best, on being capable, reliable, and trustworthy. But none of that seemed to matter to some of the people who had power in the company. Talk about diversity. Initiatives? She repeated, the disbelief clear in her voice. Are you telling me that my worth as a pilot is being questioned because of my race? Because I'm a black woman in this field? Mr. Turner didn't respond right away, but his silence was answer enough. He shifted in his chair, avoiding her gaze. He wasn't denying it, and that made Captain Morgan's blood boil. That's what this is about, isn't it? She pressed. You thought I wouldn't be able to handle certain flights, certain responsibilities. You assumed that because of my race I'd be a problem. But I've earned my place, Mr. Turner. I've flown every route you've put in front of me, and I've done it flawlessly. And now, because of some misguided assumption, you've put me on the sidelines. Her voice was steady, but the anger bubbling beneath it was undeniable. She had been patient for too long, had allowed people to look past her, to ignore her worth. And now it was time to confront it. She couldn't let this go. Mr. Turner leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He looked defeated, as though he had hoped this conversation wouldn't happen. Captain, I understand how this feels, and I want you to know that it wasn't supposed to play out this way. It's not how we operate, but I'll admit some of our policies have led to this situation. You can admit it all you want, Captain Morgan shot back, but that doesn't change the fact that I was treated like I didn't belong here. This isn't just about what happened today. This is about all the years I've had to work harder than anyone else, just to prove that I'm capable. And I'm tired of it. You can't keep ignoring this problem, Mr. Turner. There was a long pause. The others in the room exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Captain Morgan's words had cut through the tension, but the silence that followed made her realize just how much change was needed. The airline, the industry, it was all built on systems that pushed people like her to the side. It wasn't just one bad experience. It was years of subtle and not so subtle discrimination. Finally, Mr. Turner spoke again. I'll be honest. With you, Captain, this issue goes beyond just you, it's systemic. And I know we need to make changes. You deserve more than this. I want to assure you that we're working on it. Working on it? Captain Morgan's voice was sharp. How? By continuing to talk about it behind closed doors while people like me are left to deal with the fallout? How many others have been treated the same way? How many others are too afraid to speak up? Mr. Turner didn't have an answer. Captain, Morgan could see it in his eyes. He was sorry, but his apology wasn't enough, not anymore. She had spent too long in a world where apologies didn't lead to change. You'll fix it, Mr. Turner, but not just by talking about it. You need action. You need to take a hard look at your policies, at the way people like me are treated in this industry, and make a real change. Otherwise, nothing will ever change. Captain Morgan turned and walked out of the office, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and hope. She had started something today. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but it had to happen. She wouldn't let herself or anyone else be silenced anymore. This part of the story shows Captain Morgan's strength and determination to confront the issue head-on. She now knows that her fight isn't just for herself, but for all those who have been treated unfairly. Would you like to continue with the next part or adjust anything? Captain Morgan walked out of the office with a sense of purpose, but it wasn't the kind of victory she had imagined. She had confronted the problem, demanded respect, and yet the truth was still sinking in. She had always known the airline industry wasn't perfect, but today had exposed something much deeper than a mere mistake or misunderstanding. This was about ingrained biases, about a system that had long overlooked people like her. The realization made her heart heavy, but she wasn't about to let that defeat her. As she made her way down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that her words had been the beginning of something much bigger. She had stood up for herself, but now she felt a responsibility to fight for something larger, the future of other pilots, especially those who might not have the courage or the voice to speak out. This wasn't just about one isolated incident. This was about changing an entire system that had been unjust for too long. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of her phone. It was a call from Lena, a fellow pilot she had known for years. Lena was one of the few people in the industry who had always treated her as an equal. "Captain Morgan, I just heard. What happened? Are you okay?" Lena's voice was warm, but there was a note of concern in it. "I'm fine," Captain Morgan said, though the weight of the situation still pressed on her. "I'm just processing everything." "I can't believe they treated you like that," Lena continued. "You've worked so hard, and for them to act like you don't belong. It's unacceptable." Captain Morgan paused, looking around the terminal. "It's more than just today, Lena. It's everything. The whispers. The way we're treated differently. I've dealt with it my whole career, but I'm not going to keep quiet about it anymore. Not when it's clear that this is bigger than me." Lena was silent for a moment, likely taking in what Captain Morgan was saying. "You know you're not alone, right? There are so many of us who have felt the same way, who've had to fight just to be heard. But most of us stay quiet because we're scared of the consequences." "I'm scared too," Captain Morgan admitted. "But I'm tired of being scared. I've spent so many years working my hardest only to be ignored. I can't let that happen anymore, Lena. I won't." Lena's voice softened. "I'm proud of you. We need people like you to stand up. You're leading the way for all of us." Captain Morgan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Lena's words meant more to her than she could express. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong, everyone who had ever been silenced, and for the first time Captain Morgan felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. "I'm going to make sure things change, Lena," Captain Morgan said firmly. "I don't know what the next steps are yet, but I'm not backing down. Not now, not ever." After hanging up, Captain Morgan stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. She had started something. She knew that there would be challenges ahead. There would be people who would try to dismiss her, people who would try to keep things the way they were. But she had something stronger now. Purpose. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away. She looked out across the terminal, watching passengers come and go. Most of them had no idea what she was going through, what had just happened to her. They didn't know that a small moment of injustice had sparked something much bigger, but they didn't need to know. They would soon see the changes that were coming. They would soon understand why she had fought so hard. As she walked back to the gate where her crew was waiting, Captain Morgan knew she had a choice to make. She could let this moment pass, chalk it up to a bad day and move on. Or she could take action, make sure her voice was heard, and fight for the changes that were long overdue. She had already made up her mind. When she reached the gate, she was met with the familiar faces of the crew members who had all been briefed on the situation. There was an unspoken understanding among them. This wasn't just about one pilot. This was about the future of the industry, about creating a workplace where everyone was treated equally regardless of their race or gender. Captain Morgan looked at her crew, and without saying a word, they all knew what had to be done. They would support her, no matter what. "Let's go to the plane," Captain Morgan said, her voice calm but full of resolve. As she walked down the gangway to the aircraft, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was what she had fought for all these years, the right to be treated with respect, the right to be heard. And now, she was making sure that others wouldn't have to fight as hard as she had. The flight was long, and the hours in the air gave Captain Morgan time to think. She had always loved flying, but today, as the plane soared through the sky, it felt different. This flight wasn't just about getting passengers from point A to point B. It was about making a statement. It was about showing the world that change was possible, that one person could make a difference. When they finally landed, Captain Morgan received a call from the airline's legal department. They wanted to meet with her to discuss the events of the day and how they planned to address the issues she had raised. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She would have to take more steps, make more noise, but it was the beginning of the change she had been fighting for. She hung up the phone and smiled to herself. This wasn't over, far from it. But for the first time in her career, Captain Morgan felt like she had the power to shape the future. She wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a leader. And she was ready to lead the way. As she walked out of the terminal, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lena. "I'm with you, Captain. All the way." Captain Morgan smiled, feeling the weight of the moment lift. She wasn't alone. And together they would change the industry for the better. This final part shows Captain Morgan's decision to fight for change, her growing sense of leadership, and the support she receives from her peers. The story ends on a hopeful note, emphasizing the power of one individual to inspire change. Would you like to make any adjustments or continue with another project?